Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the weekly chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. I've drawn in some similar lines that I had drawn in on gold. We can see that the rising trend line here in silver apparently catching this possible bottom. And you can see it's fairly close to the high that was reached with the 2008 Bear Stearns top. We seem to come very close to that and are rallying. You can also see that the MACD has retested this low that was once visited in 2008, visited a second time after the massive 2011 silver smackdown, and now for the third time we're revisiting this low on the MACD. So that's very bullish for those who are still fundamental believers in silver and its value. And we're going to see that when we look at the main story of the night, some shocking information about the silver stockpile. So let's spend the rest of the night on this story. Now let me give you an introduction to that. I started off by wondering about the Silver Eagle sales. Now you know that this year has seen a tremendous amount of Silver Eagle sales. You can see this is the total from the U.S. Mint here for the year 2012. We're talking 33.7 million ounces of silver sold in 2012. But when we jump over to the 2013 figures, keep that figure in mind, 33.7, you can see that with virtually no reporting for May, we're already at 19 million ounces. And you can see that at the equivalent time frame during 2012, with just a little bit from May, we were at roughly half of that. So we're running at a pace right now to double this number, an approximate 67 to 68 million ounces of Silver Eagles sold in the U.S. Now, what that led me to, that shocked me so much, is the history of the Silver Eagle. Now, most of you have heard the traditional stories that patriotic senators and representatives in the United States decided to create this coin so that Americans would have the ability to invest in this very valuable asset. When we look at the history of the Silver Eagle, it's actually quite the opposite. So let's go and look at this history. This is the legislative history, you can see, of the Silver Eagle. And here's the background. The Defense National Stockpile silver sales. The impetus of the American Silver Eagle Bullion Program ultimately comes from executive plans through the 1970s and the early 1980s to sell off silver from the Defense National Stockpile. Now, we're going to follow this link here, and you'll see the links at the bottom of what that goes to, but let's continue reading. As the Wall Street Journal explained, quote, several administrations had sought unsuccessfully to sell silver from the stockpile, arguing that domestic production of silver, remember this, far exceeds strategic needs. So there's a recognition there that there is a strategic need for silver. And we'll see that when we examine the history of the Defense National Stockpile. But mining state interests had opposed any sale, as had pro-military legislators who wanted assurances that the proceeds would be used to buy materials more urgently needed for the stockpile rather than merely reduce the federal deficit. And you know how successful they've been at that. Throughout the period, such sell-offs that did occur, as well as announcements of planned sell-offs, caused immediate declines in the price of silver. The Wall Street Journal reported in September 1976, quote, when the U.S. government makes noises about selling silver from the federal stockpile, futures traders start unloading futures contracts in speculation that such a sale would depress prices. Despite congressional opposition to the sale of stockpiled silver through early June 1981, the House Armed Services Committee decided on June 10th to approve a Reagan administration request to sell government-owned silver beginning in fiscal year 1982 to help balance the federal budget. In July 1981, the House and Senate agreed to allow the sale of 75% of stockpiled silver, 105 million troy ounces, over a 3-year period. And in September, the price of silver fell 11% in response. Just before the first sale in October 1981, a group of politicians from Idaho, a major silver-producing state, attempted to block the auction, claiming that the sale could have, quote, a disastrous effect on the United States silver mining industry in general and several Idaho silver mining companies in particular. On December 3, 1981, Senator James A. McClure, Republican from Idaho, proposed an amendment to the Department of Defense appropriation bill to end the government's sale of silver, quote, until the President, not later than July 1, 1982, redetermines that silver authorized for disposal is excess to the requirements of the stockpile, end quote. The appropriations bill was signed into law with the amendment intact, effectively stopping further sale of stockpiled silver. On May 27, 1982, Senator McClure introduced Bill S-2598, a bill to provide for the disposal of silver from the national defense stockpile through the issuance of silver coins to, quote, redirect the sale of silver from our national defense stockpile in an effort to minimize its effect on the already depressed price of silver. An identical companion bill was introduced on June 22nd by Representative Larry Craig, Republican of Idaho, but both bills were referred to committees and never were enacted. The Wall Street Journal reported on June 30th that the price of silver soared after Interior Secretary James Watt announced that sales of government silver stockpile will be indefinitely postponed as the government's legally required study on potential methods of selling silver had been delayed. On January 27th of 1983, Senator McClure introduced another bill almost identical to the other bill as he had earlier. The senator asked, quote, if we're forced to accept a sale, why not use the method guaranteed to depress the price and dispose of silver with the lowest possible return to the taxpayers? Why not instead, if we must sell, at least get as much for it as we can? Therefore, today I'm introducing legislation which provides that in the event the President proposes and Congress authorizes the sale of silver from strategic stockpile, this silver would be sold through minting and distribution of a silver-bearing coin. The bill was referred to the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, which held hearings on April 15, 1983. However, it was not enacted. Some 2 years later, with sales still suspended, Senator McClure again introduced legislation aimed at requiring potential sales of stockpiled silver to be conducted through the issuance of coins minted from the silver. This time his legislation took the form of an amendment. The Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Commemorative Coin Act, McClure Amendment, the Liberty Coin Act added this section, and it gives the explanation. Now, we go down to the program's extension. This was ultimately the American Silver Eagle Bullion Program that he ended up getting enacted in 1985. And then it was extended in 2002. Now remember this year, this is a key year. The authorizing legislation for the American Silver Eagle Bullion Program stipulated that the silver used to mint the coins be acquired from the Defense National Stockpile with the intent to deplete the stockpile silver holdings slowly over several years. By 2002, it became apparent that the stockpile would be depleted and that further legislation would be required for the program to continue. On June 6, 2002, Senator Harry Reid, Democrat out of Nevada, introduced Bill S2594, Support of American Eagle Silver Bullion Program Act, to authorize the Secretary of the Treasury to purchase silver on the open market when the silver stockpile is depleted. The bill was passed by the Senate on June 21st, by the House on June 27th, and signed into law by President Bush on July 23rd, 2002. So that is not the traditional story that you are told about the Silver Eagle. Now let's go to this link here that we have for this Defense National Stockpile. The Defense National Stockpile Center, the DNSC, is a branch of the United States Defense Logistics Agency, whose purpose is to store, secure, and sell raw materials. The DNSC is based in Fort Belvoir and has operations in the United States. Materials they offer for sale included, and it gives the list there. Now you have two links here, the Defense National Stockpile Center and Defense National Stockpile Center summary at globalsecurity.org. So let's read a little bit from that article, and that is from, again, the globalsecurity.org. DLA Strategic Materials, formerly known as Defense National Stockpile Center. The Defense Logistics Agency, Strategic Materials, is responsible for providing safe, secure, and environmentally sound stewardship for strategic and critical materials in the United States National Defense Stockpile, NDS. DLA Strategic Materials store 28 commodities, remember that number, 28, with a market value as of 2010 of over $1.4 billion at 15 locations in the U.S. Commodities range from base metals such as zinc, cobalt, chromium, to more precious metals such as platinum, palladium, and iridium. There is no private sector company in the world that sells this wide range of commodities and materials. As of 2010, DLA Strategic Materials employed approximately 80 people working at 3 staff depots, a DLA headquarters in Fort Belvoir, Virginia. The National Stockpile was created shortly after World War II to acquire and store critical strategic materials for national defense purposes. Its primary mission was to protect the nation against a dangerous and costly dependence upon foreign sources of supply for critical materials in times of national emergency. In the United States, the concept of stockpiling materials for national defense dates back to World War I, when shortages caused an imbalance in production schedules and delays in implementing programs. Some would say that the idea of stockpiling for national defense dates back to the biblical story of Moses and the Israelites. I think maybe they mean Joseph. By the end of World War I, on the 11th of November 1918, the Army General Staff had gotten a message concerning the need, at least, for including critical military materials in overall planning requirements. This led to the development of a consolidated list of 42 different materials. Remember, I read to you that it's now 28, called the Harvard List, which the military found fundamentally critical in planning requirements. Later, the task of materials analysis passed the Office of the Assistant Secretary of War, but with a broadened agenda dealing with more than just solving specific wartime shortage problems. It also encompassed programs and policies to expand material resources and looked at ways to improve the availability of materials coming from outside the United States. So I'll let you read the rest of this, the history of the Defense National Stockpile Center. Now, if we go to the website, this is the DLA Strategic Materials. You can see it's www.dnsc.dla.mil. And if you go to that website, I can't do that in Firefox because it actually gives an untrusted flag. You can see that here in red, a certificate error. But you can see if you go to the site for the Defense Logistics Agency Strategic Materials, that you have these strategic material, strategic and critical materials reports. And you can see they go from fiscal year 1999 through fiscal year 2012. Now, I'm not going to take the time to read through these. I've already looked at them. One thing that you will note here is that the year 2002 is missing from these reports. We go from 1999 to 2012, and you'll find that in the year 2003, the last listing of silver in the Defense National Stockpile is given. After that, there's no more listing of silver. So one would ask the question at that point, does that mean that silver is no longer a strategic metal that's important for our national defense? I think you'd probably conclude, knowing what we know about electronics, that it would actually be the opposite. So why have we taken this original bill? If you remember, the original purpose of selling off of the National Defense Stockpile was to balance the budget and get rid of the extra silver that was being stockpiled and wasn't needed, and was for a financial purpose. So the question is, if that's the case, then why did they not cease selling these silver stockpiles when they ran out? It seems very clear here when we have this bill in 2002 by Harry Reid to support the American Silver Eagle Bullion Program, that would authorize the purchase of silver on the open market. So my question is, when did silver become something that is no longer important for our national defense? Now let's go over to an article from Charles Savoy. Charles Savoy is very, very deep on the silver story. I'll link this. It's a very long article, and this article is about silver's strategic value. And he's quoting here from a New York Times article from 1942. This is at the beginning of the war, and you can see here they're talking about the critical issue of the value of silver in the war effort. And I'll begin reading this. In The Silver Scandal, New York Times, August 29th, 1942, page 14, more editorializing took place about how silver backing of money should be scrapped. Then they reminded the readership as to the importance of silver in the war effort. Quote, there is a critical shortage of silver for defense, and there will soon be no silver at all for non-defense uses. War industries need silver today as a substitute for tin in solder, as a substitute for copper in electrical connections, and for a variety of uses in the making of ships, airplanes, tanks, trucks, guns, shells, bombs, and torpedoes. That our war industry should be short of silver and other industries should be forced to go out of business merely in order to maintain silver as a kept metal, subsidized into useless idleness by an unwilling government, is a condition that calls for indignant protest. The American National Retail Jewelers Association at their annual convention called for a presidential order making the Treasury stocks of unallocated silver available for industry. So you can see that at that time there was a outcry against stockpiling of silver for money needs when it was so desperately needed for the war effort. Ships, airplanes, trucks, tanks, bombs, shells, guns, over and over, references show that silver was necessary to all these essential war items, but now we have no stockpile. Thanks to the Silver Users Association, of which retail jewelers have always been a part, silver is needed more for monetary basis than for jewelry, and jewelry is certainly less essential than defense uses of silver. However, all applications of silver can be fulfilled by means of appropriate prices allowing mining to supply the necessary quantity of silver. Compromises were hammered out over silver's use on Capitol Hill, August 31st, 1942. So I will let you read that. Let me read a little bit more because this talks about the stockpiles. This is another New York Times quote. The Treasury is making every effort to put all available silver into urgent war work, Secretary Morgenthau said today. Substantial amounts of the Treasury's free silver, he said, are being delivered into war plants producing aluminum and magnesium. The Treasury has stocks of 2.9 billion ounces of silver, of which 1.5 billion ounces have been monetized and are a reserve against silver certificates. The remainder, 1.3 billion ounces, constitutes free silver, all of which is being lend-leased for use in war plants, where it will release 40,000 tons of copper for war uses. In the last year, there has been an enormous increase in the use of silver in industries. The metal is used extensively in the production of aircraft, ordnance, naval vessels, and for other war purposes, end quote. So, my question is, if it is true that silver is very important to the National Strategic Stockpile, and that the initial Silver Eagle legislation was to help balance the budget and sell off that silver, why is it that we now no longer have silver listed? As I pointed out here, you can go through these material reports and find that in this critical year here, the last year being 2003, silver is no longer listed as a strategic metal, yet it would seem, based on what we know from the uses of silver, that silver is actually a more important strategic metal right now than it's ever been, considering the use of electronics in warfare. But as you can see, and as I pointed out, we're on course to actually double this number of Silver Eagles sold to the public this year. With the mine collapse recently, that means that not only will the United States not source its silver for the Silver Eagle program internally, it'll actually be forced to begin importing physical silver from foreign countries, not for a defense stockpile, which is now at zero, but to actually just mint the coins that are demanded by the public. So you can see this thing has gone way too far in the opposite direction, and we should expect, if we want to see this corrected, we're going to have a tremendous price spike, because silver is going to have to be stockpiled, and it is being stockpiled by silver stackers, but it's my opinion it's also going to have to be stockpiled for us to resupply the national defense stockpile, which has been very unwisely squandered, and I cannot give you the explanation for that. You're going to have to come up with that one for yourself, and we'll talk to you next time.